Nobody was supposed to be in that attic. Nobody was even supposed to know it existed. That was exactly why Lucian Sterling climbed the narrow stairs at midnight, to get away from every single person who did know where he was. 3 floors below, in the grand hall of his Tuscan estate, 200 of the world's most dangerous art collectors were bidding on stolen masterpieces under a blaze of crystal chandeliers. Bianca, his fiancée, stood at the center of it all, in a gown that caught every flash of light, her voice smooth and commanding as she pushed the bids higher. She was brilliant at this. She always had been. But the lights were the problem. Lucian was 31 years old, the coldest boss the Sterling crime family had ever produced, a man who could end a rival's career with a single phone call. And he was going blind. Not all at once, slowly. A private war his doctors had warned him about 2 years ago, his vision narrowing at the edges like a curtain being drawn shut, inch by inch. Bright light had become his enemy first. The chandeliers, the camera flashes, the gold-trimmed mirrors reflecting everything twice. By the time the auction hit its second hour, his head was pounding and his eyes felt like they were on fire. So he did what he always did. He disappeared. Nobody questioned it. The boss came and went as he pleased. He slipped through a side door, climbed 2 flights of servant stairs, and kept climbing until the noise below faded into a distant hum. At the very top of the house was a door he hadn't opened in years. The old attic, sealed off since his mother's death, filled with furniture nobody wanted and memories nobody discussed. He pushed the door open, expecting darkness and dust. Instead, he found light. A single warm lamp glowed in the far corner, and beneath it sat a woman hunched over a canvas, a fine brush in her hand, completely unaware that the door had opened. Lucian's first instinct was fury. Someone had broken into his private space during his own event. His hand moved toward the gun at his hip. Then she looked up, and the anger drained out of him so fast it left him dizzy. She was full-figured, dressed in a plain maid's uniform with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, dark hair pulled back in a loose knot with paint smudges on her cheek like a careless signature. Her eyes went wide with panic when she saw him, but Lucian wasn't looking at her face anymore. He was looking at what she'd been painting. His mother. The portrait had been missing for 10 years. Everyone in the family assumed it had been sold off, lost, destroyed in some forgotten deal his father made before he died. Lucian had stopped asking about it years ago, the way you stop asking about anything that only brings you pain. And now, here it was, propped on an easel in his own attic, half restored, his mother's soft smile emerging from beneath decades of grime, like she was being brought back from the dead. "Where did you find this?" he said. It wasn't really a question. It came out low and rough, barely above a whisper. The woman set down her brush with shaking hands. I was told to work up here. I didn't know anyone would." "I asked you a question." She swallowed hard, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then something shifted in Lucian's memory, slow and strange, like a photograph developing in his mind. The shape of her face, the particular way she chewed the inside of her cheek when she was nervous, the steadiness of her hand, even now, even frightened, still resting protectively near the canvas, as if she'd throw herself in front of it before letting anything happen to that painting. He knew her. Mina? The name left him before he'd even decided to say it. Her breath caught. Whatever she'd expected from this midnight confrontation, it wasn't that. She stared at him like she was seeing a ghost, and honestly, so was he. 10 years ago, Mina Rossi had been the brightest student in their class at the Roman Art Academy, the girl who could look at a 500-year-old painting and tell you exactly what pigments the artist had ground with his own hands. She'd vanished the summer after graduation, no warning, no goodbye. Lucian had asked about her once or twice over the years and always gotten the same answer. Nobody knew where she'd gone. And now she was here, in his house, in a maid's uniform, restoring his dead mother's portrait in a locked attic that no one, not his security team, not his own fiancée, had told him anything about.
Lucian.
Mina's voice cracked on his name, 10 years of silence folded into 2 syllables.
You're not supposed to see this.
Downstairs, the auction bell rang, announcing the final round of bidding. But Lucian didn't move. He stood frozen in the doorway of his own forgotten attic, staring at the one person from his past he'd never expected to find hiding in his present. And already, some cold, calculating part of his mind was asking the question that would change everything. What else has Bianca been hiding from me? For a long moment, the only sound in the attic was the distant murmur of the auction below, muffled through 3 floors of stone and wood. Lucian stepped inside and shut the door behind him, cutting off even that. "Start talking," he said. "From the beginning." Mina's hands were still trembling, but she made herself set the brush down properly, the way he remembered her doing at the academy, never in a rush, even when everything around her was falling apart. She wiped her palms on her apron and finally met his eyes.
You really don't know,
she said quietly. It wasn't a question either. It was a realization settling over her, and it seemed to hurt her more than anything else that night.
Know what?
She looked past him, toward the door, as if checking that no one had followed him up.
Your fiancé destroyed my family, Lucian.
He almost laughed. Almost. But something in the flatness of her voice stopped him.
My father had a small gallery in Rome,
Mina continued.
After the academy, I went to help him run it. We weren't rich, but we were honest. 3 years ago, Bianca came to us with an investment offer. She said she wanted new talent, fresh names, and she'd fund an exhibition of my father's collection in exchange for a share of the profits. We trusted her. Everyone trusts her. She's beautiful, and she smiles like she means it.
Lucian's jaw tightened. He knew that smile well. The exhibition never happened, Mina went on. Instead, she buried my father in loans he never agreed to, forged his signature on contracts, drained the gallery, and when he couldn't pay, she had men come to collect. Not gentlemen, Lucian. Men like yours. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through it. My father had a heart attack 2 months after that. He never recovered his business. He barely recovered his pride. Lucian said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence could hold more weight than any question. After he died, I had nothing. No gallery, no income, a mountain of debt with my name attached because I'd co-signed things I didn't understand. Mina wrapped her arms around herself as if the memory alone made the room colder. Bianca found me again a year later, not to apologize, to offer me a job, here, in this house, under a different name, doing work no one was supposed to know about. She said if I didn't take it, she'd make sure I never worked in restoration again, anywhere in Europe. She has that kind of reach. You know she does. What work? Lucian said. His voice had gone dangerously quiet, the tone his enforcers knew to fear. Mina hesitated, and for the first time that night, Lucian saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of him, but fear of what she was about to say. She's been selling your family's real collection, Mina said. The originals, piece by piece over the last year, to private buyers who don't ask questions. And she's had me paint replacements. Copies good enough that even your own appraisers wouldn't catch it. Because I trained under the best restorers in Florence, and I know exactly how to age a canvas, exactly which pigments were used 100 years ago, exactly how to fake wear on a frame so it looks untouched for a century. She swallowed. I didn't want to do it, but she made it clear what would happen to me if I refused. And she made it clear what she'd do to your family's name if the theft ever came out. She'd make sure it looked like I had done it alone. A poor forger who infiltrated the Sterling estate. No one would believe otherwise. Lucian felt something cold settle in his chest, colder than anything he'd felt in years. He thought of the paintings hanging in his hallways, the ones he could no longer see clearly enough to judge for himself. He thought of how many times he had walked past them, trusting they were real, simply because Bianca told him they were. And this, he gestured to his mother's portrait on the easel, Was this on her list too? Mina shook her head quickly.
No, this one I saved myself. I found it in a shipment marked for disposal. She was going to burn it, Lucian, because it wasn't worth anything to a buyer, just sentimental clutter taking up space. I couldn't let that happen. I've been restoring it in secret, on my own time, hoping that someday I could give it back to you without anyone knowing I'd kept it.
For the first time since he'd walked into that attic, Lucian looked at her. Really looked at her. Not as an intruder, not as a stranger, but as the same brilliant, stubborn woman who used to argue with their professors about restoration ethics until the whole classroom went quiet just to listen. She had lost everything. Her father, her business, her name. And still, in secret, at real risk to herself, she had chosen to save the one thing that meant nothing to anyone but him. Something shifted inside Lucian Sterling that night. Something that had been frozen since his mother's death, since he'd learned to survive in a world built on cold calculation and colder betrayal. He turned toward the door.
"Where are you going?"
Mina asked, alarmed. "Downstairs," he said, "to end an auction." Before she could stop him, he was already moving, descending the stairs 2 at a time, his blindness be damned, fury lighting a path clearer than any chandelier ever could. He crossed the length of his own grand hall in long, furious strides, every head turning as he approached the podium where Bianca stood mid-sentence, gavel raised for the final bid. "Stop the auction," Lucian said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. The hall fell silent instantly. Bianca turned to him, confusion flickering across her perfect face.
"Lucian, darling, what?"
"You're finished," he said, loud enough for every buyer, every guest, every rival family representative in that room to hear. "Effective now, you have no authority over this collection, this estate, or anything bearing the Sterling name." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Bianca's face went white, then furious, her mouth opening to protest, but Lucian wasn't finished. He turned to the top of the stairs, where Mina stood frozen, still in her maid's uniform, paint still on her cheek, watching in disbelief as 200 of the most powerful people in the underground art world turned to look at her too. "As of tonight," Lucian announced, "Mina Rossi is the sole master director of the Sterling Art Empire. Every decision, every acquisition, every restoration goes through her." The room erupted into stunned whispers. Bianca's engagement ring caught the chandelier light one last time as her hand curled into a fist. Whatever war was coming, it had just begun. Bianca didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood there under the chandeliers with her ring hand curled into a fist, watching 200 witnesses absorb what had just happened to her. And Lucian knew that silence was far more dangerous than any outburst would have been. "We need to leave," he murmured to Mina as he climbed the stairs back to her. "Now."
"Leave? Lucian, this is your house."
"Which is exactly why it isn't safe." He took her by the elbow, gently but firmly, steering her past the shocked buyers still frozen mid-bid. "Bianca has spent a year building a network in this house. Guards who report to her before they report to me. Staff who owe her favors. The moment I turn my back, she'll have people looking for you, and I don't intend to find out what she's capable of when she's desperate." Mina didn't argue further. She grabbed only 2 things before they left: a small satchel of restoration tools she kept hidden behind a loose floorboard, and, wrapped carefully in an old blanket, his mother's half-finished portrait. She wouldn't leave it behind, not even for an hour. They slipped out through the servants' entrance at the back of the estate, the same way Lucian had entered the attic hours earlier, except now the noise behind them wasn't a party. It was chaos. Voices shouting, a car engine already gunning to life somewhere near the front gates. Bianca's people, mobilizing fast. Lucian's own car, a black sedan he kept for exactly this kind of night, was parked near the old stable house, unregistered and untraceable. He opened the passenger door for Mina himself, something his security detail would have found strange. The boss didn't open doors, not even for his fiancée.
But tonight, none of the old rules seemed to matter anymore.
They drove north in silence for the first 20 minutes, the Tuscan hills rolling past in shades of black and silver under a moon Lucian could barely make out anymore. He kept both hands tight on the wheel, jaw set, eyes narrowed against the glare of oncoming headlights that sent hot spikes of pain through his skull.
"You should let me drive,"
Mina finally said, watching him wince at another passing car.
"You can barely see the road."
"I can see enough."
"Lucian?"
Her voice was soft but firm, the same tone she used to use when correcting a professor's mistake in class.
"You don't have to prove anything to me. I already know what you're dealing with."
He glanced at her, surprised. "How?"
"You've been squinting since the attic, and earlier, at the auction. Bianca told everyone you had a migraine. But it's not a migraine, is it?"
Lucian was quiet for a long moment, the tires humming against asphalt, the only sound between them. Then, for the first time in years, he told someone the truth without being forced to. "Degenerative," he said. "Started 2 years ago. My doctors give it another 3, maybe 4 years before there's nothing left. Bright light is the worst of it. I can manage low light and shapes, but color, detail, distance, it's all getting harder." Mina absorbed this without pity, which he appreciated more than she probably realized.
"That's why you didn't notice the forgeries," she said slowly, piecing it together. "Not because you're careless, because you physically can't examine brushwork the way you used to."
"I used to be good at it," Lucian admitted, something bitter creeping into his voice. "Back at the academy, I could spot a fake from across a room. Now I have appraisers do it for me, and apparently even they're compromised, or blind to what Bianca wanted them to miss."
"You had me," Mina said quietly. "You just didn't know it yet."
He pulled the car over onto the shoulder of the empty road, the engine idling, and finally let himself really look at her in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. The paint still smudged faintly on her cheek, the exhaustion in her eyes, the quiet strength that had carried her through a year of servitude she never deserved. 10 years, he said. 10 years I wondered what happened to you, and you were being crushed by the same woman I was about to marry.
"I didn't know it was you,"
Mina said.
"Not until I started working in the estate and heard the staff talk about the boss. Even then, I told myself it couldn't possibly be the same Lucian from the academy. The boy I knew wanted to open a gallery, not run an empire built on stolen paintings and debt collection."
"Things change," he said quietly. "People change, not always for the better."
"You changed the ending tonight," Mina reminded him. "That has to count for something."
He didn't answer right away. Instead, he put the car back into drive and continued toward Florence, where his private estate sat behind reinforced walls and loyal staff who had served the Sterling family for 3 generations. People Bianca had never managed to touch. As the hills gave way to the outskirts of the city, Mina broke the silence again.
"Your entire collection, Lucian. Every painting she's touched over the last year. I need to see it all. Compare it against restoration records, provenance documents, anything that still exists on paper. If she's been selling originals and replacing them with my forgeries, there has to be a pattern, a timeline, something that proves this wasn't just theft, but a planned operation."
"You'd do that? After everything she's put you through?"
"I'm not doing it for you,"
Mina said, though the softness in her voice suggested otherwise.
"I'm doing it because those paintings are the only thing I have left that I'm actually proud of. Even the fakes. I made sure every single one was good enough to fool an expert. Good enough that whoever ends up owning them will never know the difference except in their own conscience. I want to know exactly how much she took, and I want to help you get it back."
Lucian nodded once, something settling in his chest that felt dangerously close to hope. "Then we start tomorrow," he said. "Every vault, every painting. We find out exactly what Bianca stole and exactly how much she's going to pay for it." The lights of Florence rose ahead of them in the darkness, and for the first time in years,
Lucian Sterling drove toward his future without dreading what waited for him there. The private vaults beneath Lucian's Florence estate had been carved into the old stone foundation generations ago, back when the Sterling family still called themselves collectors instead of criminals. Climate-controlled, humidity-regulated, guarded by steel doors that required both a fingerprint and a code only Lucian knew, it was the one place in his empire he'd always trusted completely. By the second morning, he was starting to understand how wrong that trust had been. Mina worked methodically, moving from canvas to canvas with a magnifying lamp in one hand and a small vial of chemical solution in the other, dabbing tiny, invisible test patches along the edges of each frame where restorers checked for authenticity. Lucian stood close beside her the entire time, not because he needed to supervise, he trusted her completely now, but because being near her had become its own quiet comfort, something he hadn't let himself feel in years.
"This one's real," Mina said, straightening up from a Baroque landscape that had hung in the east hallway since before Lucian was born.
The craquelure pattern is authentic. You can't fake 300 years of natural cracking, not perfectly. Whoever painted the fakes was skilled, but they rushed some of them. How can you tell? Come here. She waved him closer, angling the lamp so the light fell directly across the canvas surface. Feel this ridge, right along the shadow line. Lucian leaned in, close enough that he could smell the faint mineral scent of her solvents mixed with something warmer underneath. Jasmine, maybe, or something like it. His fingers grazed the canvas where she guided them, and even with his vision fading at the edges, he could feel the subtle texture she meant, raised just slightly under his fingertips.
"That's real paint aging over centuries," Mina explained, her voice softer now that they were standing so close. "A rushed forgery skips that. It looks right from a distance, but it doesn't feel right."
"Is that what you learned to do?" Lucian asked quietly. "Make things feel right, even when they're not?" Something flickered across her face. Hurt, maybe, or an old wound reopening. "I never wanted to make forgeries, Lucian. Every fake I painted for Bianca I hated, but I made sure they were flawless anyway, because a sloppy fake gets discovered, and discovery meant consequences for my family." "I know," he said quickly, regretting the question. "I wasn't accusing you." "I know you weren't." Her hand found his for just a moment, brief and unplanned, before she pulled back to continue her work, her cheeks slightly flushed in the dim vault light.
They kept working like that for 2 full days, Lucian guarding the vault entrance personally, refusing to let even his most trusted enforcers inside, while Mina tested canvas after canvas, frame after frame. Somewhere in the long hours between paintings, something shifted between them that neither one acknowledged out loud. He started bringing her coffee without being asked, remembering exactly how she used to take it back at the academy. Too much sugar, barely any milk. She started explaining her work in more detail than necessary, just to keep him talking, just to hear his voice fill the quiet vault instead of the silence that used to define his life. On the second afternoon, Mina reached the far end of the central vault, the section holding the Sterling family's crown jewels of collecting, a cluster of Italian Renaissance works that had been passed down for 5 generations, each one worth more than most countries' annual budgets. She went still.
"Lucian." Her voice had changed completely, all warmth drained out of it. "Come here. Now." He crossed the vault quickly, alarmed by her tone. "What is it?" Mina was staring at a small Madonna and Child, one of the oldest pieces in the collection, holding her UV light against the lower corner of the frame. Beneath the light, faint markings glowed that shouldn't have been there. A symbol, small and deliberately hidden, etched into the underside of the canvas stretcher. "This isn't one of mine," she said quietly. "I didn't paint this fake." "What do you mean? If it's not real and it's not yours, then someone else made it." Mina's hands trembled slightly as she turned the frame over completely, revealing more of the hidden marking. "Lucian, I know this symbol. Every serious forger in Europe knows this symbol. It belongs to the Varga family. Lucian's blood went cold. The Vargas were a rival syndicate out of Eastern Europe, old enemies of the Sterling family for 2 generations, responsible for a string of violent territory disputes that had cost both families dozens of lives over the decades. If their mark was hidden inside his own vault... "She's not just selling originals to private buyers," Mina said slowly, the full weight of the discovery settling over her face. "Bianca swapped your entire central collection with Varga forgeries. Not cheap replacements meant to fool casual observers, sophisticated ones, made by professional forgers working directly for your family's oldest enemies." Lucian moved down the row of paintings with new urgency, watching Mina check each one, her UV light revealing the same hidden marking again and again across nearly a dozen pieces. The true heart of his family's legacy, replaced piece by piece with counterfeits bearing his rival's secret signature.
"This isn't just theft," Lucian said, his voice hollow with the realization.
"This is an alliance. Bianca hasn't just been stealing from me. She's been working with the Vargas the entire time, feeding them my family's real collection while dressing my walls in their fake ones."
"Which means whoever ends up owning these originals," Mina said, "the Vargas are either selling them for profit or holding them as leverage against your family. Either way, she's been arming my enemies with my own inheritance." Lucian's hands curled into fists at his sides, something cold and furious burning behind his damaged eyes.
"For over a year, right under my nose."
Mina reached out and placed a steady hand on his arm, grounding him before the fury could carry him somewhere reckless.
"We'll find them," she said. "Every single original. I promise you that."
He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face, illuminated by the soft glow of the vault's overhead lights, and for one suspended moment, the danger of everything they'd just uncovered faded into something quieter. Gratitude, and something warmer than gratitude, settling in the space between them.
"Thank you," he said softly, "for seeing what no one else could."
Neither of them moved to break the moment, but somewhere above them, in the world they'd both have to return to eventually, Bianca was already 3 steps ahead, and the 48 hours of peace they'd bought themselves in Florence were about to run out far sooner than either of them expected. The knock on the estate door came at 7 in the morning, sharp and official, nothing like the casual visits Lucian was used to from his own men. He was in his study, reviewing the vault findings with Mina, when his head of security, Marco, burst in without knocking, something Marco never did.
"Lucian, there are officers at the gate. Milan police, and they're not alone. Interpol liaison too. They have a warrant."
Lucian stood immediately. "For what?" Marco's eyes flicked to Mina, and Lucian's stomach dropped before the answer even came. "Art theft and forgery," Marco said. "The warrant names Mina Rossi." Mina went pale, the papers in her hands trembling slightly.
"That's not possible. I haven't stolen anything. I've spent the last 2 days proving the opposite."
"It doesn't matter what's true," Lucian said grimly, already moving toward the door. "It matters what's on paper. Bianca knew we were auditing the vaults. She knew exactly how much time we needed before we could prove her guilt, so she made sure to strike first." They reached the front hall just as the heavy doors swung open. A squad of officers filed in, led by a stone-faced Interpol agent holding a folder thick with documents. Behind them, half hidden near the gate, Lucian caught a glimpse of a black car with tinted windows. Bianca's car. She hadn't even bothered to hide her involvement. "Mina Rossi," the lead officer announced, stepping forward with a pair of handcuffs already in hand. "You're under arrest for international art theft, forgery, and fraud, under warrant issued this morning based on evidence submitted by—" "Submitted by whom?" Lucian interrupted, positioning himself directly between the officers and Mina before anyone could reach her. The officer hesitated, clearly unprepared to be challenged by a man whose name alone made most of Milan's police force nervous.
The warrant cites documentation from Bianca Moretti, a legitimate art dealer with verified shipping manifests, showing Miss Rossi's fingerprints on multiple forged pieces recovered from a warehouse outside the city. Fingerprints on forgeries she was forced to create under threat, Lucian said, his voice like ice. By the same woman who filed this warrant. That's not for me to decide, Mr. Sterling. I have a legal obligation to execute this arrest. Mina's hand found Lucian's sleeve behind him, gripping tightly, and he could feel her trying to keep her breathing steady despite the fear radiating off her. Whatever calm authority she carried in the vault, examining brushstrokes and chemical signatures, evaporated the moment armed officers filled the hallway of a house that was supposed to be safe.
"Look at the shipping manifests again," Lucian said, forcing his voice into something calmer, more calculated. He'd survived a dozen negotiations far more dangerous than this one, and panic had never won him a single one of them. "Check the dates. Bianca claims these forgeries were shipped by Mina independently, correct?" The officer flipped through his folder. "That's what the documentation states." "Then you'll find," Lucian continued, "that Mina Rossi has been confined to my private estate in Florence for the past 2 days under my personal supervision, working alongside me to audit a collection that has since revealed evidence of a criminal partnership between Bianca Moretti and the Varga Syndicate. I have security footage, staff witnesses, and vault access logs proving her exact location during the entire window your warrant claims she was arranging illegal shipments." The officer's confident expression faltered slightly. Interpol agents didn't like inconsistencies, and Lucian had just handed him a significant one. "I want to see that footage," the agent said carefully. "You'll see it," Lucian replied, "the moment my lawyers are present, and not a moment before. Until then, I'm invoking every legal protection my family's standing affords me, and I'm formally requesting 48 hours to produce full counter-evidence proving Mina Rossi's innocence and Bianca Moretti's guilt." The lead officer glanced at his colleagues, clearly uncomfortable with the political weight suddenly pressing down on a routine arrest. The Sterling name carried influence that reached far beyond ordinary law enforcement, influence built on decades of quiet arrangements between his family and people in power who owed him favors they couldn't easily ignore. 48 hours, the officer finally said, "but she doesn't leave your custody, and if you're wrong about this—" "I'm not wrong," Lucian said. "I'm rarely wrong about people. I was wrong about one once. I don't intend to repeat that mistake twice in the same lifetime." The officers retreated slowly, reluctantly, casting suspicious glances back at Mina as they filed out. Through the window, Lucian watched Bianca's black car finally pull away from the gate, no longer bothering to stay hidden now that her plan had partially failed. The moment the door shut behind the last officer, Mina's legs seemed to give out slightly, and Lucian caught her before she could stumble, one arm wrapping firmly around her shoulders. "She's willing to send me to prison," Mina whispered, her voice shaking now that the danger had passed and the fear was finally allowed to surface. "Just to protect herself." "She's willing to do far worse than that," Lucian said grimly. "This was a warning shot, Mina. She knows we found the Varga marking in the vault. She's not just trying to silence you. She's trying to discredit anything you might say before we can prove it." 48 hours, Mina repeated. "That's not enough time to prove an entire criminal conspiracy." "It's enough time to find the originals," Lucian said, his mind already racing ahead, calculating routes and contacts and the fastest path forward. "If we can locate where the real paintings are being held before they're sold off completely, we won't need 48 hours of paperwork. We'll have physical proof strong enough that no warrant, no forged manifest, and no amount of Bianca's influence will matter." Mina looked up at him, exhaustion and determination fighting for control of her expression. "Do you know where they'd take pieces that valuable? Somewhere secure enough to hide masterpieces worth millions?" Lucian's jaw tightened as an old memory surfaced, whispered rumors from years ago about Bianca's family connections, a facility she'd mentioned once in passing during their engagement, before he'd understood what she really was. "Geneva," he said quietly. "There's a free port storage facility outside the city.
diplomatically protected, barely regulated, exactly the kind of place where stolen masterpieces disappear for years without anyone asking questions. He looked down at Mina, resolve hardening in his damaged eyes. That's where she's hiding them, and that's where we're going next. They left for Geneva that same night, boarding a private express train under names that belonged to no one. Lucian's forged documents, arranged through a contact who owed him a debt too large to refuse.
No private jets, no obvious departures from any Sterling-owned airstrip. If Bianca had eyes watching for them, and she almost certainly did, she'd be watching the sky, not the rails. The train car was small and quiet, wood-paneled in old European elegance, rocking gently as it cut north through the darkened countryside. Mina sat across from Lucian with a laptop balanced on her knees, scrolling through years-old shipping records Marco had managed to pull before they left Florence. Fragments of Bianca's paper trail, half hidden behind shell companies and vague export codes.
There, Mina said, turning the screen toward him. A Freeport unit registered under a company called Lysandra Holdings. Guess who's listed as a silent partner? Lucian squinted at the screen, the small text swimming slightly at the edges of his vision.
Bianca.
Bianca, Mina confirmed. Filed 18 months ago, right around the time she first approached my father about that exhibition deal.
Her jaw tightened.
She was already planning this before she ever ruined my family. We were never an accident, Lucian. We were part of the plan from the beginning.
Lucian said nothing for a long moment, watching the dark hills roll past the window, though all he could really make out now were smudges of black against a slightly lighter black sky. He was used to compensating for what he couldn't see. Tonight it was harder than usual, his mind too crowded with fury to focus on anything but the woman across from him and everything Bianca had stolen from her, piece by piece, over years neither of them had known were connected. "When we get there," he said finally, "I want you nowhere near the actual breach. My men can handle the physical security. You'll wait somewhere safe until it's clear." Mina closed the laptop with a soft click.
No.
"Mina!"
You need me inside that vault, Lucian, not waiting in a car 3 streets away.
She leaned forward, her eyes steady despite the exhaustion carved into her face.
Freeport facilities like this store thousands of crated works. Your men are excellent at breaking locks and disabling alarms, but none of them can tell an original 15th century panel from a Varga forgery in under a minute, under pressure, in the dark. I can. That's the entire reason we're on this train.
He wanted to argue. Every protective instinct in him wanted to lock her somewhere far from danger and handle this the way he handled everything else, with force, with his own men absorbing the risk instead of her. But she was right, and worse, he knew she was right, and some old part of him, the boy who used to sit beside her in restoration lectures at the academy, respected her too much to dismiss it just to soothe his own fear. "Fine," he said, "but you stay close to me the entire time."
That,
Mina said, a faint, tired smile finally breaking through,
I can agree to.
They spent the next hour working through the practical problem neither brute force nor bravery could solve on its own. How to identify and remove a dozen priceless originals from a heavily monitored vault without triggering the very alarms that made the facility so secure in the first place.
Varnish,
Mina said eventually, sitting up straighter as the idea took shape.
Every restorer uses a slightly different varnish formula. It's almost like a signature, especially older ones mixed by hand before synthetic compounds became standard. The varnish on your family's originals would have been applied decades ago, using techniques and materials specific to whichever restorer worked on them at the time. Under UV light, the aging pattern in that varnish glows in a very particular way, completely different from anything modern, and definitely different from whatever Varga's forgers used.
You can tell them apart just by the glow?
With the right calibration, yes. I've studied varnish decomposition patterns for years. It was actually my specialty at the academy, remember? While everyone else obsessed over brush strokes, I was the one in the back of the lab testing UV responses on decade-old samples.
She allowed herself a small, proud smile at the memory. It means we don't need to physically examine every crate in that facility. I can scan quickly, identify which pieces are genuinely yours by their varnish signature, and mark them for extraction. No unnecessary noise, no wasted time standing in front of active sensors longer than we have to. And the alarms themselves? That's where your men come in, Mina said. I identify, they extract. Quietly, quickly, using the layout you already have from Bianca's old company filings. If we're precise about it, we're in and out before their security rotation even notices anything's missing. Lucian studied her for a long moment, something warm and unfamiliar settling behind the calculation in his eyes. You've thought this through completely. I had a lot of time on this train, Mina said softly, to think about everything Bianca's taken from people who never deserved it. My father, my name, your family's legacy. She looked up at him, something more vulnerable slipping into her voice now that the tactical planning had run its course. I want this to be over, Lucian. Not just for you, for me too. I'm tired of being someone Bianca gets to erase whenever it's convenient for her. Lucian reached across the narrow space between them and took her hand, the way he hadn't quite let himself do since that first night in the attic. After tonight, he said quietly, she won't get to erase anyone ever again. Outside, the lights of Geneva began to glow faintly on the horizon, the train slowing as it approached the border. Somewhere beyond those lights, in a climate-controlled vault no ordinary person even knew existed, his family's stolen legacy waited in the dark. And so, unknowingly, did Bianca's mercenaries, already alerted to the possibility that someone might come looking. The Geneva Freeport sprawled across the outskirts of the city like an anonymous fortress, rows of windowless warehouses behind razor wire, protected by diplomatic loopholes that kept customs officials and law enforcement alike at arm's length. It was the perfect place to hide stolen fortunes. Nobody asked what sat inside crates marked personal effects when the paperwork claimed diplomatic immunity. Lucian's men had spent the last 2 hours mapping the perimeter from a rented van 3 streets away, studying guard rotations, camera blind spots, and the precise timing of the facility's private security patrols. By midnight, they had what they needed. 2 guards on the east entrance, Marco reported quietly through the earpiece Lucian wore. Rotation every 11 minutes. We move on the next gap. Lucian crouched beside Mina in the shadow of a service alley, both of them dressed in dark clothing that blended into the night, a UV scanner tucked into the satchel slung across her shoulder. Her breathing was steady, but he could feel the tension radiating off her. Not fear, exactly, more like the sharpened focus of someone about to walk into the most important test of her life. Stay close, Lucian murmured. Whatever happens inside, you don't leave my side. I know, Mina whispered back. I already agreed to that. Twice. The gap came. Marco's team moved fast and silent, disabling the exterior camera loop and slipping through a service door before the returning guards completed their circuit. Lucian and Mina followed close behind, moving through a narrow maintenance corridor that led deep into the storage complex, past rows of numbered vault doors, each one sealed behind reinforced steel and biometric locks. His men made quick, quiet work of bypassing. Unit 47, the one registered to Lysandra Holdings, sat at the very end of the corridor, unmarked except for a small brass plate bearing a code instead of a name. The door opened with a soft hydraulic hiss, and Lucian felt his chest tighten as the vault's interior lights flickered on, revealing row after row of wooden crates stacked floor to ceiling, each one stenciled with shipping codes that meant nothing to the untrained eye, but told Mina everything she needed to know. Renaissance panel works, she breathed, moving quickly along the first row, her UV scanner already humming to life. Dozens of them. Lucian, this is everything. This is your entire family's collection. She worked with practiced speed, sweeping the scanner across crate after crate, watching for the faint, telltale glow of decades-old varnish beneath the ultraviolet light. Each confirmed piece got a small strip of colored tape from Lucian's men, marking it for extraction, while Mina called out identifications in a hushed, urgent voice. A Madonna, a landscape, a family portrait 3 generations older than Lucian himself. They were nearly a third of the way through the vault when Mina froze in front of a crate near the back wall, her scanner light flickering across a symbol burned faintly into the wood.
Lucian.
Her voice had dropped to barely a whisper.
This isn't storage. This is a staging area. Look at the manifest tags. Half these crates are scheduled for transport within the next 72 hours. She wasn't just hiding these here. She was preparing to sell them off, permanently, to buyers who'd scatter them across private collections around the world where we'd never find them again.
Then we're not just recovering evidence, Lucian said grimly. We're stopping a sale that's already in motion. That was the moment the vault's heavy steel door slammed shut behind them. The sound echoed through the enclosed space like a gunshot, followed immediately by the mechanical whir of atmospheric locks engaging, a security feature meant to protect the vault's climate-controlled contents from fire or contamination, now being weaponized against the people inside it. "Marco!" Lucian's voice cracked through his earpiece, sharp with alarm. Static answered him. Nothing else. Mina's face went pale in the sudden dimness as the overhead lights dropped to a low emergency glow.
What's happening?
Someone locked us in, Lucian said, already moving toward the door, running his hands along the seams, searching for any manual release. There wasn't one. The door had been designed to keep intruders in, not out.
This isn't standard security. Someone triggered this manually.
A voice crackled over a hidden speaker somewhere in the vault's ceiling, distorted and cold. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Rossi, I wish I could say it's a pleasure." Lucian's blood turned to ice. He recognized the voice, one of Bianca's mercenary captains, a man named Draven who'd worked private security for her family's dealings for years, someone Lucian had once trusted enough to nod to in passing hallways. "Draven," Lucian growled toward the speaker, "open this door, now."
"I'm afraid I can't do that, sir. Miss Moretti was very specific about her instructions if you two ever found your way here."
A pause, filled with something almost like regret.
"The atmospheric system in this vault is designed to purge oxygen in the event of fire, to protect the contents from smoke damage. It's a very effective system, very fast, and very quiet."
The soft hiss Lucian had barely noticed moments earlier suddenly took on a horrifying new meaning. He looked up, following the sound to a series of vents along the ceiling, and understood with sickening clarity exactly what Draven meant.
"You're going to suffocate us," Mina said, her voice tight with disbelief rather than panic, her restorer's mind still working even as the danger became clear. "To destroy the evidence along with us."
"Miss Moretti sends her regrets," Draven's voice continued through the speaker, flat and businesslike, as though discussing shipping logistics rather than crime. "Though I suspect she doesn't mean that sincerely. Goodbye, Mr. Sterling. It was, genuinely, an honor working in your family's orbit for as long as I did." The speaker clicked off, leaving only the growing hiss of oxygen bleeding out of the sealed room, and the flickering emergency lights casting long shadows across crate after crate of priceless, stolen masterpieces. The very evidence that was supposed to save them, now surrounding them like witnesses to their own quiet execution. Lucian turned to Mina, already feeling the air in the vault growing thinner, and saw in her eyes the same fierce refusal to surrender that had first drawn him to her 10 years ago, in a classroom neither of them had ever expected would lead them here. "We're not dying in this vault," he said. "Think, Mina. You know chemistry better than any of Draven's men ever will. There has to be a way out." Mina's eyes swept the vault, past the crates, past the flickering emergency lights, landing finally on the small satchel of restoration solvents still slung across her shoulder. And slowly, through the growing haze of thinning air, something sharp and determined began to take shape behind her eyes. "There might be," she said, "but it's going to be dangerous." The air was already thinning, a subtle pressure building behind Lucian's ears.
the kind of sensation he remembered from past flights before his hearing had learned to adjust.
Mina knelt beside her satchel, pulling out small glass vials with hands that trembled only slightly, her mind clearly racing faster than her fear could catch up to. "What are you thinking?" Lucian asked, crouching beside her, watching her sort through solvents he couldn't name even with perfect vision. Fire suppression systems like this one are designed to purge oxygen and flood the room with inert gas to smother flames, Mina explained quickly, her restorer's instincts sharpening into something almost tactical. But they're also designed to trigger an emergency override if they detect an actual fire. Full ventilation, forced door release, everything reversed immediately. Because the alternative is trapping firefighters inside a burning building. You want to start a fire? In a room full of priceless paintings? Not a real fire. Mina held up 2 of the vials, their labels faded with age. A controlled chemical reaction. Acetone and a specific concentration of hydrogen peroxide. Restorers use diluted versions of both to strip old varnish without damaging the canvas beneath. Combined in the right ratio in an enclosed space, they create heat and smoke without an open flame. Enough to trigger the sensors, not enough to actually ignite anything solid. And if you get the ratio wrong, then we find out the hard way that this vault really was designed to keep evidence from ever being found. Mina met his eyes, steady despite the danger radiating from her own plan. I've done small-scale reactions like this before. In the lab, under supervision, with proper ventilation. This isn't ideal, but it's the only chemistry I have on me, and it's the only thing in this vault I actually understand better than the men who locked us in here. Lucian didn't hesitate. Do it. Mina worked fast, mixing the compounds in a shallow metal tray she'd pulled from the vault's cleaning supplies, careful to keep the ratio exactly as she remembered it from years of lab work. The moment the 2 liquids combined, a sharp chemical smell filled the air, followed almost immediately by a thin curl of white smoke rising from the tray, hotter than either of them expected. "Move back," Mina warned, dragging Lucian several steps away as the reaction intensified, smoke thickening rapidly in the enclosed space, curling up toward the ceiling vents where the sensors waited. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The smoke spread. The oxygen kept thinning. Lucian's chest had begun to ache with the effort of breathing air that no longer seemed to satisfy his lungs the way it should, and he watched Mina's face for any sign that her plan had failed. Then, with a sudden mechanical shriek, alarms blared to life throughout the vault, red emergency lights flooding the room in a frantic pulse. The atmospheric purge system shut down instantly, replaced by the roar of forced ventilation fans kicking into overdrive, flooding the room with fresh air. Somewhere down the corridor, Lucian heard the unmistakable sound of the vault's main door releasing, hydraulic locks disengaging under emergency protocol. "It worked!" Mina gasped, relief and exhaustion crashing over her at once. "It actually worked!" Lucian didn't waste the moment. He pulled her toward the door, both of them stumbling slightly as fresher air rushed into their starved lungs, and together they pushed through into the corridor, just as Marco's team came sprinting from the opposite direction, weapons raised, having finally broken through whatever jamming signal Draven's men had used to cut their communications. "Lucian!" Marco's face flooded with relief at the sight of them both alive. "We lost contact the second that vault sealed. We've been tearing through this building for 20 minutes trying to find an override." "Draven," Lucian said, his voice hoarse but sharpening fast with fury now that the immediate danger had passed. "Where is he?" Marco's expression darkened. "We caught him trying to slip out the loading dock. He didn't get far." They found Draven, restrained against a support pillar near the facility's rear exit, flanked by 2 of Lucian's men, his composure from the vault's speaker system nowhere to be found, now that he was staring down the barrel of Lucian's own fury in person. "You were going to let us suffocate," Lucian said, closing the distance between them slowly, deliberately, every word carrying the cold weight of a man who'd spent his entire life learning how to make people afraid of him. "For her." Draven's jaw tightened, but something in his eyes had already cracked, the look of a man who'd followed orders his whole career and was only now confronting exactly what those orders had asked of him. "She said it would look like an accident. Faulty fire suppression.
Tragic, but explainable.
Record it, Lucian said flatly, nodding toward one of his men holding a phone. Everything. Who gave the order, why, and what she's planning to do with the collection once it's sold. Whatever loyalty Draven still had toward Bianca crumbled fast once he understood the alternative, a confession on video, or a very different conversation with men who had far less patience than Lucian did. Within minutes, Draven was speaking directly into the camera, his voice flat and resigned, detailing Bianca's orders in exact, damning detail. The vault seal, the purge system, the instruction to destroy any evidence, including the two people who'd come looking for it. Lucian watched the confession with quiet, simmering satisfaction, one arm still wrapped protectively around Mina's shoulders as she leaned into him, exhausted but alive, her hands finally steady now that the danger had passed. We have him on video, Marco confirmed, checking the footage. Direct orders, direct confession. This is enough to bring to the council. Then we're not finished tonight, Lucian said, looking down at Mina, something fierce and protective still burning behind his damaged eyes. We take the confession, we take the originals, and we finish what Bianca started. Behind them, his men had already begun carefully extracting the marked crates from the vault, loading them into a convoy of unmarked trucks under the cover of Geneva's pre-dawn darkness. Somewhere back in Italy, Bianca was likely already celebrating a job she believed had been completed, unaware that the two people she'd tried to erase had walked out of that vault stronger and far more dangerous than they'd ever been before. Lake Como, Lucian said quietly, watching the trucks pull away toward the border. The Syndicate Council meets there in 3 days. That's where this ends. The High Council chamber at Lake Como had hosted 3 generations of Sterling family business, a grand hall of dark wood and glass overlooking water so still it looked painted. Tonight, it held something far more dangerous than a routine meeting. It held Europe's most powerful underworld families, gathered to decide alliances that would shape the next decade of their world. And Bianca Moretti, standing at the head of the room, mid-pitch, utterly unaware that the ground beneath her was about to disappear. Lucian and Mina arrived quietly, slipping in through a side entrance just as Bianca gestured toward a projected image of the Sterling family's Renaissance collection, her voice smooth and confident as she addressed the assembled council elders.
A partnership that benefits everyone at this table, Bianca was saying, her eyes bright with the particular hunger Lucian now recognized for what it truly was. The Sterling collection, combined with new investment from our friends in the East, positions this alliance to dominate the private acquisitions market for the next generation.
New investment from the Vargas, Lucian said, his voice carrying across the chamber before he'd even fully stepped into the light. Every head in the room turned. Bianca's confident expression faltered for the first time, her eyes widening as she registered Lucian standing in the doorway. And beside him, unmistakably alive, Mina Rossi.
Lucian.
Bianca recovered quickly, forcing warmth back into her voice as she addressed the council elders seated around the long table.
Forgive the interruption. My darling fiancé has clearly had a difficult week.
Sit down, Bianca. The command came not from Lucian, but from the head of the table, an elderly man named Cardinale who had presided over council meetings since before Lucian was born. His eyes moved between Lucian and Bianca with the sharp calculation of someone who'd survived 4 decades of underworld politics by never missing the moment power shifted in a room. Mr. Sterling doesn't interrupt council business without reason. Let's hear it. Bianca's jaw tightened, but she had no choice except to step back from the projection screen, her composure cracking at the edges as Lucian walked forward and took her place at the front of the chamber. 3 weeks ago, Lucian began, I discovered that my fiancé had been systematically stealing my family's collection and replacing the originals with forgeries. What I didn't know, until recently, was that those forgeries carried the Varga family's mark, meaning Bianca hasn't simply been robbing me, she's been arming a rival family with my inheritance while selling them to buyers behind this council's back. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Cardinale's expression hardened.
These are serious accusations, Mr. Sterling. This council requires proof, not grievances from a broken engagement. I have proof. Lucian nodded toward Mina, who stepped forward with quiet composure, despite every eye in the room now fixed on her. A woman most of the council had never met, standing in a room built for men who'd spent lifetimes deciding who lived and who didn't.
"My name is Mina Rossi," she said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the room around her. "I trained as an art restorer at the Roman Academy, and for the past year, I was forced to forge replacements for the Sterling collection under threat to my family. I have direct knowledge of every fake in circulation, and I can prove right now in front of this table exactly which pieces in Bianca's presented collection are genuine and which are synthetic copies made to deceive this council." Bianca's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd. She's a maid Lucian took pity on, feeding him whatever story keeps her out of prison." "She was arrested 3 days ago on a warrant you filed," Lucian cut in, his voice cold, "using forged shipping manifests that placed her at a location she never visited during a window when she was under my direct supervision in Florence. I have security footage proving it. Would you like to explain that to the council as well?" Bianca said nothing. Around the table, several council members exchanged glances, the first real cracks of doubt beginning to show. Mina moved to the projection screen, where Bianca's presented collection still glowed in soft light, and pulled a small UV scanner from her bag, along with several photographs she'd taken back in the Florence vault, side-by-side comparisons of authentic varnish patterns against the telltale glow of Varga forgeries. "This piece," Mina said, gesturing to a Renaissance panel Bianca had specifically highlighted as the centerpiece of her proposed partnership, "is not authentic. Under ultraviolet light, genuine centuries-old varnish shows a distinct irregular aging pattern built up over decades of natural exposure. This piece shows a uniform synthetic glow, consistent with modern forgery techniques, and consistent with the same hidden marking I discovered on nearly a dozen pieces recovered from a Geneva Freeport registered under Bianca's silent partnership in a company called Lysandra Holdings." She clicked through photograph after photograph, methodically dismantling every claim Bianca had made that night, her restorer's expertise turning the council's skepticism into something far more dangerous for Bianca: certainty. "And here," Lucian added, nodding to Marco, who stepped forward with a tablet in hand, "is a recorded confession from Bianca's own security captain detailing her direct order to eliminate 2 witnesses in Geneva by sealing them inside an oxygen-purged vault, along with her offshore transaction records tracing over €4 million in payments from Varga-affiliated shell companies over the past 18 months. The video played across the chamber's main screen, Draven's flat, resigned confession filling the silent room, followed by scrolling financial records that left no room for interpretation. By the time the footage ended, Bianca's face had gone the color of ash, her earlier confidence entirely stripped away, replaced by the panicked expression of someone realizing, too late, that the trap she'd built for others had finally closed around her instead. "Bianca Moretti," Cardinale's voice cut through the silence like a blade, cold and final. "You stand accused before this council of theft from a family member, forgery, attempted finishing of 2 witnesses, and secret dealings with a rival syndicate without council approval. How do you answer these charges?" Bianca's mouth opened, but no defense came. There was nothing left to say. Every lie she'd built over the past 2 years lay exposed under the harsh chamber lights, and for the first time since Lucian had known her, she looked genuinely, completely afraid. Lucian felt no satisfaction watching her unravel, only a quiet, steady relief, and beside him, Mina's hand finding his own, steady now, no longer trembling, as the woman who'd tried to destroy them both finally faced the reckoning she'd spent years trying to avoid. The chamber remained silent for a long moment after Cardinale's question, the weight of Bianca's exposed crimes settling over the assembled council like a verdict already decided. When Bianca finally spoke, Her voice had lost every trace of the smooth confidence that had once commanded rooms exactly like this one.
"Whatever I did,"
she said, her eyes darting between the council elders, searching for even a flicker of sympathy.
"I did to secure this family's future. The Varga partnership would have brought resources none of you could access alone."
"By selling out one of your own," Cardinale interrupted, his voice sharp with disgust. "You didn't secure anyone's future, Bianca. You gambled this council's trust for personal profit, and you nearly cost the Sterling family everything they've spent generations building." Bianca's composure finally shattered completely.
"Lucian, please."
She turned toward him, her voice cracking with something that might have been genuine desperation, or might have simply been her last available tactic.
"We were going to be married. Whatever happened with the collection, whatever mistakes I made, surely that counts for something."
Lucian looked at her for a long moment, searching for even a trace of the woman he'd once agreed to spend his life with. He found nothing there anymore, except a stranger who'd spent 2 years systematically destroying everyone unlucky enough to trust her.
"You didn't make mistakes, Bianca," he said quietly. "You made choices. Every single one of them designed to profit at someone else's expense. My family's legacy, Mina's father, Mina's entire life. I don't forgive choices like that. I don't think I ever really loved you enough to try."
The admission landed harder than any accusation could have, and Bianca visibly recoiled, understanding at last that whatever hold she'd once had over Lucian Sterling had disappeared long before tonight. Somewhere in an attic, in front of an unfinished portrait, the moment he'd looked into Mina's eyes and remembered exactly who he used to be, before Bianca had reshaped him into someone colder. Cardinale rose from his seat, and the rest of the council rose with him, the ancient formality of the chamber asserting itself over the raw emotion of the moment. "Bianca Moretti," Cardinale announced, his voice carrying the full authority of decades presiding over exactly this kind of reckoning. "This council strips you of all titles, holdings, and standing within the Moretti family name, effective immediately. You are permanently exiled from all syndicate business across Europe. Every asset traced to your dealings with the Varga family will be seized to repay the debts you've incurred against this council's trust, including the full value of everything stolen from the Sterling estate." 2 of the council's own enforcers stepped forward, flanking Bianca on either side. She looked around the chamber one final time, searching for an ally who no longer existed, before her shoulders finally sank in defeat.
"You'll regret this,"
she said, her voice low and venomous, though it was unclear anymore whether the words were meant for Lucian, for the council, or simply for the unraveling of everything she'd built.
"All of you."
Nobody answered her. The enforcers led her from the chamber, her footsteps echoing against the marble floor until the heavy doors closed behind her, sealing away 2 years of manipulation, theft, and betrayal in a single, final exit. The chamber remained quiet for a moment longer before Cardinale turned his attention to Mina, his sharp eyes studying her with newfound interest now that the dust had settled. "Miss Rosie," he said, "this council owes you an apology. You were wrongfully accused, threatened, and nearly finished, all while working to expose a conspiracy that would have damaged every family represented at this table. That kind of loyalty and expertise doesn't go unrecognized here." Mina straightened slightly, unsure how to respond to formal recognition from a room full of people who, only hours earlier, had been prepared to believe the worst about her.
"I only wanted to protect what mattered," she said simply. "The paintings, the truth. People deserve better than what Bianca gave them."
"A rare sentiment in this world," Cardinale said, something almost like approval in his voice. "This council formally recognizes you as a legitimate and valuable asset to the Sterling family's interests, under full protection of syndicate law. Any future threat against you will be treated as a threat against the Sterling name itself." The weight of that protection settled over Mina slowly, the realization that after years of being invisible, disposable, easily erased by people with more power than her,
She now stood under the same formal shield that had kept Lucian's family safe for generations. Lucian stepped beside her, his hand finding hers in front of the entire council without hesitation, without the careful calculation that used to govern every public gesture he made.
"There's something else," he said, addressing the table directly. "Effective immediately, Mina Rossi will oversee the recovery and restoration of every piece stolen from my family's collection, along with full authority over all future acquisitions, not as a temporary appointment, permanently." Murmurs of approval moved through the council, several of the elders nodding in quiet respect, not just for Lucian's decision, but for what it represented, a rare public declaration that competence and honesty mattered more, in the end, than blood or beauty or the careful political marriages that usually defined power in their world. As the meeting adjourned and the chamber slowly emptied, Lucian and Mina remained behind for a moment, standing together beneath the dim chandelier light overlooking Lake Como's dark, still water through the tall windows.
"It's over," Mina said quietly, still adjusting to the strange lightness of the realization. "All of it. Bianca, the forgeries, the threats." "Not over," Lucian corrected gently, turning to face her fully, something warm and unguarded finally settling into his expression now that there was nothing left to fight. "Just beginning." Outside, the lake reflected the last scattered lights of the chamber, calm and undisturbed, as if the water itself understood that whatever storm had passed through these halls tonight had finally, completely, run its course. A month had passed since the council chamber at Lake Como had stripped Bianca Moretti of everything she'd built on lies, and the change in Lucian Sterling's world was almost impossible to reconcile with the man he'd been before that midnight auction. The dark hallways of the Tuscan estate, once filled with the noise of black market bidding and the constant hum of guarded secrets, had gone quiet in a different way now. Not the cold silence of suspicion, but the peaceful quiet of a house finally at ease with itself. The auction hall, where Bianca had once presided over stolen masterpieces, had been converted into something else entirely, a legitimate exhibition space, its walls now hung with authenticated works, each one accompanied by careful documentation proving exactly what it was and where it came from. Lucian stood at the center of it, watching Mina walk the length of the gallery with a clipboard in hand, checking the final placements for the Foundation's opening exhibition. She moved with the same quiet confidence he remembered from the academy, except now there was nothing forced about it, no fear hiding beneath the surface, no debt hanging over her family's name. The Sterling Art Preservation Foundation had been his idea, born somewhere in the exhausted, adrenaline-soaked hours after the council meeting, when he'd finally allowed himself to imagine a version of his family's legacy that wasn't built on theft, threats, and stolen inheritance. A legitimate institution dedicated to recovering and restoring lost masterpieces, training the next generation of restorers the way Mina herself had once been trained, except this time, without anyone twisting that talent into a weapon against them. He'd placed Mina in charge of the entire operation without hesitation, and in the weeks since, he'd watched her transform the foundation from an idea into something real, something that mattered far beyond the Sterling family name. Restorers from across Europe had already reached out, eager to work under her direction. Museums that had once quietly avoided any association with the Sterling collection, wary of its underworld reputation, were now requesting partnerships, drawn by the Foundation's growing legitimacy and Mina's own reputation as one of the finest authentication experts on the continent. "You're staring," Mina said, without turning around, a faint smile audible in her voice, even from across the gallery. "I'm allowed to stare," Lucian said, crossing the room toward her. "It's my gallery." "It's our gallery," she corrected, finally turning to face him, clipboard lowered. "You made that very clear in front of the entire council, if I remember correctly." "I remember it clearly too." He reached out, gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, the same gesture that used to feel impossible for him, too soft, too vulnerable for a man who'd spent his entire adult life
guarding against exactly this kind of closeness. It didn't feel impossible anymore. Every piece in this room exists because of you. The originals we recovered, the forgeries we exposed, the foundation itself. None of it happens without you walking into my life again. You make it sound like fate, Mina said softly. Maybe it was. Lucian's damaged eyes, still slowly losing their edges to the condition that would never fully leave him, found her face anyway, memorizing what little detail he could still hold on to. The paint-stained fingers she could never quite scrub clean, the fierce intelligence behind her gaze, the quiet strength that had carried her through a year of servitude and still emerged whole on the other side of it. Or maybe I just finally learned to recognize what mattered, once everything false had been stripped away. He led her by the hand out of the gallery, through the wide glass doors that opened onto the estate's restored terrace, overlooking Lake Como's still, silver water in the fading light of early evening. The villa behind them, once associated with underworld business and quiet threats, now hosted something entirely different. Legitimate partnerships, honest work, a family name slowly being rebuilt on foundations that could actually hold weight. I have something to show you, Lucian said, guiding her toward a small structure at the edge of the terrace that hadn't been there a month earlier. A custom-built studio, its glass walls flooding the interior with natural light, easels and restoration equipment already arranged inside, waiting. Mina's breath caught as she stepped through the door, taking in the space slowly, her hands trailing across a workbench built exactly to her specifications, though she'd never once mentioned wanting anything like this. How did you— I paid attention, Lucian said simply. The way you talked about light, about needing natural sun instead of artificial lamps for accurate color work. The way you mentioned, years ago at the academy, that you always dreamed of having your own studio someday, somewhere quiet, somewhere that felt entirely yours. You remembered that? From 10 years ago? I remember everything about you, Mina. I think some part of me always did, even when I convinced myself you were just a memory I'd lost. He reached into his jacket pocket, and Mina's eyes widened as he lowered himself slightly, opening a small velvet box to reveal a ring that caught the last golden light of sunset. Simple and elegant. Nothing like the extravagant, showy jewelry Bianca had always favored. 10 years ago, I let you disappear without ever telling you how I felt, Lucian said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability written plainly across his face. I'm not making that mistake twice. Mina Rossi, you saved my mother's memory, my family's legacy, and honestly, you saved me, long before I understood I needed saving at all. Stay. Not as my employee, not as someone I rescued, as my equal, as the person I want beside me for whatever time I have left to see clearly, and every year after that, even once I can't. Tears gathered in Mina's eyes, but her smile broke through them completely, 10 years of longing and loss and quiet hope finally settling into a single, certain answer. Yes, she said, closing the distance between them. Yes, Lucian, 1,000 times yes. As the sun dropped fully below the horizon, painting the water in soft gold and violet, Lucian slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her close, the studio behind them standing as quiet proof that some things, once broken, could be restored more beautifully than they'd ever been before, not by erasing the damage, but by understanding it completely, the way only someone who truly loved the original could. They stood together on that terrace, no longer boss and hidden maid, no longer separated by 10 years of silence or Bianca's carefully constructed lies. Just two people who'd found their way back to each other, ready to build something real from everything that remained.